Great, thanks guys. Really excited to be here. Thanks to the CFO Leadership Council for having us. Really excited to talk about the second pillar, future of finance organizations will require a modern CFO. Way better than an ancient CFO or prehistoric CFO. Modern, that's what we all want to be, right? So one quick story just kind of leading into this personal story that kind of will shed a little light on me and my family. This happened to me about a year ago. I had 5-year-old twins at the time, trying to run this company, and a lot of chaotic stuff going on at the time. So, not a lot of time to sit down and just watch a TV show and relax. But I had this show I really wanted to watch, and I said, man, I'm gonna figure out a way to watch it. So I'm gonna record it, get it all set up. Somehow I'm gonna get the kids in bed on time. Don't know how, but I'm gonna get it done. And I'm gonna set aside a little time to watch this show. So I do it. Everything goes according to plan. Kids actually go to bed right as I said they would. Never happens, but did this day. So I'm like, okay, I got my little window. I get in my chair, get the remote control out. I'm ready to go, turn the show on, and all of a sudden the show comes on, but there's subtitles screaming along the bottom of it. And I don't know about you guys, but like subtitles drive me crazy. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got this hour window where I just wanted to watch this one show, but now I got these subtitles going. So I look at the remote control, and it's one of these ones with 50 plus budget buttons, and I'm looking for something that says subtitles, don't see anything, hit the menu button, trying to navigate through the menu, can't get it, can't figure it out, and I'm starting to get so frustrated, I'm like, I might throw this remote out the window. And my wife comes walking by right at this time, and I'm looking down at the remote, and I see this little microphone button, and I tell her, I'm gonna try this, there's no freaking way it's gonna work. And I hit the button and I go, please remove subtitles. And boom, subtitles were gone from the screen. I was like, wow, that's awesome. And I later found out I don't even have to use the word please, I can just tell it what to do. So that was cool, and that was my first introduction to AI and its impact and what it can do and how it can impact our lives. And there's a couple of points from that story I'd like to relate into the modern CFO. That feeling that I had, that anxiousness, that frustration when I couldn't get it to go off, that's the same feeling that the business has when it's asking questions, what they think are easy questions of the finance function, and they can't get an answer back. They don't understand why it's not easy. They don't understand, they live in a world of the smartphone. They don't understand why they just can't get the answers like that. And so they get very frustrated, right? And the other thing is that just like there's applications to make my life easier and get subtitles off the screen, there's applications around that same type of technology within the finance function as well. And we'll dive into that a little bit. So first, a little bit on the modern CFO and what are some of the challenges and requirements of that today. And I'm gonna talk here for probably about 20 minutes or so, and then we're gonna have a little bit of a breakout session where we'll ask some questions of the audience, divide the audience into two, let you guys kind of talk about the question a little bit, and then kind of come back with some of the feedback that we're getting from the audience. So, all right, typical requirement of a CFO. Modern CFO, strategic, right hand to the CEO, understand all the business drivers, the business model and the key drivers, know the growth and funding strategy, be driving that, looking at M&A strategy, be really thinking about where the business is going. One of the things I love about financials and finance is that every decision that the company makes ends up on the financials. You buy a stapler, that ends up on the financials. You hire a salesperson, that ends up on the financials. You decide to open up a new office in another city, that ends up on the financials. The modern CFO should know what that impact is gonna be before it ends up on the financials. And so to have time to do that, you gotta stay focused up here. The problem is that most of us get drugged down into the tactical operations. And these are the things, this is just what I call keeping the lights on in the building, right? It's, can you pay and get paid? Can you close your books quickly? Can you produce the financial statements that you need out to the business, both internally and externally, so the business has what it needs to run? Again, this is think of this as, it's like in a building, the plumbing and the electricity. If you walk into the building and the plumbing and electricity are working great, nobody notices, right? If it's not working great, the lights are off, the water's not working, can't go to the bathroom, then everybody notices, right? And so these are the things that when they're not working, it drags the CFO down because they got to get involved with these things. And so it can just be a major time suck. So, and I think a good example of this is, I heard this, I was on a panel the other day and one of the CFOs there said, yeah, nobody's come up to me and patted me on the back and said, hey Jim, great journal entry. That's really gonna change the course of this company, right? And it's so true, you know, we get sucked into these kind of things, but that's not gonna change the course of the company. What's gonna change it is the top stuff. And you should really be thinking about how do you get 80, 90% of your time focused on the top items and not the bottom items. Because if it's not, if it's more like 50-50 or the other way, you can never be strategic just because you don't have enough time to free your mind up to think about it. And of course, these come under other constraints. So there's time constraints. And I think as a modern CFO, when you come in today, if you come into a situation, let's say a company hires you in because finance and accounting function is not working that great, they need to make some big changes. When you come in today's world, you've got 3 to 4 months as a modern CFO to make the change. If it's 6 months or a year, especially if it's getting towards a year, now you're just part of the problem, right? So how do you do it quickly? And then of course you're gonna have cost constraints, right? So, and this kind of the curve here is the finance and accounting function as a cost, as a percentage of revenue, right? So all of your people costs, your CFO, controller, staff, plus your software costs, all your systems and technology costs, add all of that up, that is a percentage of your revenue. This is what the top 25% of companies are doing. This is what the world-class companies are achieving. And this is shifting down, right? 10 years ago, that $500 million line was around 1.5%. And so it's constantly moving down and continues to move down as more and more technology and automation come about. So how do you do all of this with the cost constraints and the time constraints? Well, one of the things we're seeing as we've worked with thousands of companies here is the traditional structure of the finance function is kind of failing to keep pace. And there's a couple of fundamental reasons why that I'll go through here. But largely, and when I say the traditional structure, it's hiring people and hiring a team and buying software and putting those together and trying to figure out how to get the end results that you want to get. And the reasons they're starting to fall behind is the exponential pace of technology. If you think about it, accounting was invented back in the 1400s, then largely, literally 400 or 500 years went by and nothing changed. It's just people wrote it in general ledger on books, kept it, and that was it. Not till 1978 did your first software package come out. Peachtree was actually the first one. And then other packages came out. And even 1995, late 90s, that's actually when email adoption and some of these things came about. Your cloud-based solutions, really cloud-based GLs and cloud-based point solutions for accounts payable and other things didn't even start coming out until the late 2000s and really adopted until the late 2005, 2010. Digital workflows, I remember when we started the company in 2006, 2007, you couldn't even do a digital AP workflow because scanning, you could scan, but the size of the files were so big, you couldn't do high volume scans. You couldn't have thousands of papers that you needed to scan. It would just be too big. And so it's not until like 2008, 2010 that you started getting that type of technology where you could do those things. And so the major point of this slide is that for 500 years, basically nothing changed within the finance and accounting function. The last 10, 15 years, massive change and disruption to the finance function. And you can see it here on this slide. So these are general ledgers, and this is a list of a couple of them. Your CRM tools, Salesforce, Harvest, AR and AP tools, Bill.com, Mineral Tree, expense management tools, Expensify, Concur, Tally, all on down the line. And there's literally hundreds of these. This is just a sample set of a few of them. The interesting thing about this is none of these companies even existed 10 or 15 years ago. QuickBooks is probably the only one that was really around. All of these are new within the last 10 or 15 years. So your finance and accounting functions are looking up and going, okay, there's all this new technology. I need to be applying it to the finance function, but which ones do I pick? How do I get them to integrate and work together? How do I know if I pick this one, it's the right one for my business? And there's a lot of mass confusion around what to do. So, and a lot of times they spend a ton of time just trying to figure out which one to pick, when a lot of times it's really a trade-off between Coke and Pepsi. They all have a lot of the functionality that you need. It's more about how do you know, how can you have the expertise to make the systems dance and do what you need them to do. The other thing is on the skill sets, right? So we kind of think of the skill sets fall into two major buckets, maintainers. So maintainers, their DNA is steady, repeatable, reliable, day in, week in, month in. So they do the same things, right? And when the world was 500 years of pretty much stable, no change, that was great. Most of your staff accountants, senior accountants kind of fall into that bucket and they fit great into that world. But in today's world where things are changing a lot, you need builders, right? System implementers, process design people that can do cleanup projects, M&A integrations, CFOs, strategic CFOs. And so these people, their DNA is a lot more, they like change, they like redesigning things. They can thrive in ambiguity. Ambiguity is gonna drive the maintainers crazy, but builders love that. They love creating process out of chaos. And so it's a completely different skill set. And the thing that we see a lot is people trying to take a maintainer, a controller or an accounting manager and say, hey, go find one of those technologies on the last slide, figure out how to make that work and how to get that integrated into to our finance and our business. And it's a recipe for disaster. We kind of call it, they're looking for the unicorn, right? And we've all done this where we've, it said, hey, this person's gonna solve all these different things. And especially when their day job is kind of a maintainer role, asking them to go do a part-time project in an environment that they're not even used to is really tough. And just to take this a little further, the technology skill sets are getting more and more and more specialized, right? So I think, we hear this a lot too. Well, John, at his last company, used NetSuite. So John's gonna go help us move off of QuickBooks and move us on to NetSuite. There's a huge difference between the number of people that have used an application like NetSuite, the number of people that have actually administered that application, which is completely different from actually implementing it. And implementing it once or twice is way different because we all know the first or second time we do anything is a lot harder than the 50th time we do it. It's a lot different than the people that have implemented it 20, 30, 40 times. And even people that have done that, there's a specialized skill set within some of the complex modules that a lot of these tools have now, like contracts or project accounting. In fact, we were looking for one of the people in that top box there and literally could not find one in Austin, Texas. So we're in Austin, great technology city, literally could not find somebody with that unique skill set in Austin. I had to get on a plane and go to Nashville, have dinner with the guy and hopefully talk him into coming and joining us. So that's some of the specialization that's coming in the skill sets now. And so what all of this is translating into is that the finance and accounting function today lacks transparency. It's never been the most transparent function to start with, but in today's world with the smartphone, the business people again, are very used to having quick things at their fingertips. They're able to get answers quickly, and today it's really difficult within the finance function. So today, most finance functions look something like this. You've got a general ledger, you've got a payroll system, you've got, maybe you're still getting paper invoices and sorting through that crazy world, or maybe you've at least evolved to a digital kind of AP workflow. They might have an expense, a T&E solution, and then they've most definitely probably got a ton of Excel files floating around with a bunch of different tabs and rows and columns of data. And business executives, the CEO, the head of sales, head of delivery, they got questions, right? And they need answers. And typically what happens is they've got a wizard in the box. We call them the wizard in the box. It's the person, the guy or girl that sits on top of the finance function, that they're the person that can jump into that quagmire of all those other things and pop out with the answers. Because the CEO and the head of sales, they don't understand general ledgers, they don't understand these finance and accounting systems, and they don't even actually want to go through rows and rows of spreadsheets. They just want the answers, right? And so typically there's a person there that kind of is the go-between. It's almost like the finance middleman. The business person has a question, they come to them, they pop out with the answer. The problem is that a lot of times they're really busy with a bunch of other stuff. So the business has a question, you know, what's our projected cash flow? How much does customer XYZ owe us? And they want a quick answer, but the person's busy closing the books or doing something else, so they don't have time to give them the answer. They say, hey, let me get back to you in 3 or 4 days. And that's super frustrating for the business folks. It also creates big single points of failure, right? Like if this person's not here, then there's a big problem. We actually ran into this with one of the implementations we were doing. We were working with one of the CFOs, and as we had mapped out all their processes, we kind of found in their order to cash process, there was literally one guy in their entire business that could invoice their customers. And so we took that to the CFO. I went and had a conversation with the CFO and said, hey, you know, just as we mapped this out, we kind of identified this situation, like this is a pretty complex usage model. This guy has to download all this stuff from a SQL database, and then he does all these manipulations, and he's literally the only person in your company that can invoice a customer. So if for some reason he was gone, you literally have no way to invoice and get paid. And the CFO, you know, rightly so, that's a huge problem. We gotta change that. And I was like, yep, we'll absolutely make sure that we fix that going forward. And he's like, no. He goes, that person is a huge problem. Because that person, anybody in our company that would create a process that's solely reliant upon them isn't a good person to be in this company. And I thought it was a great learning experience from one of those situations. So staying out of the key points of failure. Now we'll do a quick breakout here on a couple questions. So I'll give a question for this side and a question for this side. Would love for you guys at your tables to talk through it a little bit and think through the question and kind of come up with some of your thoughts. And then once we come back, we'll ask a couple of the tables to share what their thoughts are. So first question, how do you keep up with the evolution of finance and accounting technology, and what obstacles will you face when you look to make those investments? First one. So let's have this side of the audience take that one up, okay? Second one common obstacle to transparency is managing and reconciling multiple sources of data. What are you doing to solve that problem, or how have you overcome that obstacle? So we'll have this side of the audience take up that piece. We'll have a couple of people from our team kind of walk around and just help facilitate a little bit, but if you can, work amongst yourselves at your table and just kind of think through that and share some experiences with the companies that you're at. Awesome. What were some of the key takeaways from some of the tables? Let's talk and have everybody else be able to hear here. Let's start on this side. What were some of the key takeaways from some of the audience over here? Did any table have a good takeaway that they wanted to share? Some of the things that they talked about? Yep, we got one right back here.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm from Acreon. So when we were looking at this, we had said that part of the consideration is the cost and the direct correlation between time savings for the employees and the cost savings that you would gain from that, as well as revenue generation, so people aren't focusing on administrative functions, they're focusing on the business, and also transparency to like the global executives in the organization so they can have a clearer real-time picture as to what's going on.
Yep, got it. Cost being a huge component. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Hi, Tyler Drollette. Why would we upgrade, or how do you keep up with the evolution of F&A technology? Our point we landed on was don't upgrade just to upgrade. Rather, we would evaluate the technology and the upgrades as they come for their true economic benefit to the F&A team and the company as a whole. If you're able to eliminate a series of processes, great. But what do you do with that resource that you have? Should turn it more into operating the business more effectively. And then the question around what obstacles will you face when you look to make these investments. Typically, F&A is usually last on the table to spend, if you will. At least from, I think the general consensus here is that we will choose to spend on go-to-market functions within the company before we'll spend on F&A technology.
Yep, makes total sense. I think that ROI trade-off's a huge one when looking at any technology you're putting in place is, how much cost, what are the pain points it's going to solve and how much cost can it take out, and does that more than cover the cost of it coming in? It's great. Let's do one more over here and then we'll move over to this side.
Hi, Jim Waddell from Bose. We talked a lot about basic technology structure, making sure that our strategy in finance was aligned with the broader IT strategy and their roadmap, so there's a lot of connection points that we talked about there. We also talked about some basic financial models and making sure we understood what the payback was and the measurement process and how to loop back. And then there was a general theme around change management and not underestimating the need to make sure that we had buy-in across the organization and you could execute your projects well to achieve the payback that you're looking for.
Yeah, great. Those are awesome too. I do think the training of any new technology you put in place and the tail there in terms of making sure people are skilled at using it is huge for that piece of it. Okay, let's go to this side. Thoughts on this side around the question? One common obstacle to transparency is managing and reconciling multiple sources of data. Any thoughts at the tables there, seeing those challenges and ways to solve it? Let's see. Got one here.
So we had a variety of objectives in this. One was first getting everybody to understand. Look at that!
Get the technology to work.
Wow, powerful. Is coming up with a common set of agreement objectives at the management teams or whatever else, because all too often we're running down things and we don't have agreement at that level. And then on the data's, trying to understand that, what looks like normalizing the data, making sure you have approval of the data that's going into, so finance approves data going into a BI database or something like that on a monthly basis and reconciles. And then I think one of the other things that we said that I think is very powerful is getting super users in each of the different functional areas with access, working together as teams. And not only does that encourage some of your better players, but it also spreads the knowledge and gets them collaborating together.
Yep, those are great. There's one over here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa. I actually work in healthcare as an interim CFO for equity-backed ventures. And a lot of what we deal with is multiple data sources because the equity-backed ventures are obviously buying up multiple companies, practices, things like that, and putting them together. So I live in this world, and we didn't solve the problem in our 5-minute discussion, but one of the things that we all kind of agreed to was something that I see every day. It's so easy, but it's just getting the different businesses, especially in a roll-up, to agree on definitions of what something means. Like, very simple. I know that seems like common sense, but a scan in this practice doesn't necessarily mean a scan in another practice. And a lot of people kind of miss that. That's a small thing, but it's really important. And if you're just, if you're trying to make sense of performance, everybody needs to be speaking the same language. So nothing technical, but yeah.
Very good. Great. I also heard some talk over here, and we'll take one more around Excel, and Excel having a ton of different uses, but a ton of different data in there, and that creating a lot of multiple sources of data and being a problem, and the need to get things out of Excel as much as possible, that there's a lot of functionality within the ERP systems and some of those things that can help you get out of the Excel world, which everybody knows, anybody can manipulate those spreadsheets.
Yeah, and that's actually where we were going too. Excel spreadsheets are a huge problem. If you can have one data source where your project management group and your inventory group and your finance group and even your sales team can input into one data source, one system integrated. That will help transparency.
Yep, that's awesome. That's really good. Last one, we'll do one more. Anything else? Okay. Well, I can move on then, great. So now that we've talked about a lot of the problems and some of the current challenges of the modern CFO, let's talk a little bit about where all this stuff is going. We hear a lot about the new technologies coming, AI. I think if you read anybody's list of top industries to potentially get disrupted by AI, almost every single one of them would have finance and accounting in the top 5. So what does this look like when some of these automation and AI and some of these other tools come to the finance function? What does it start to look like? So meet Simon. Think of Simon as basically the Alexa of the finance department. Simon's a tool that we've actually been working on and have developed. We're beta testing it now with 7 clients. And so Simon can basically answer most of the general questions you would have for the finance and accounting function. So things like, do you have any payments that need to be approved? How much money do I owe a certain vendor? Can you show me this invoice that's outstanding? How much revenue did we make on a certain product? Basically, any question that you might have, Simon can basically answer it. All the data is there and exists. You don't really need to have a finance middleman that's just taking a question from the business, going into all the different data sources and then popping out with the answer, a la the wizard in the box that we talked about. You can have simple tools like this that can do that. And we're not the only ones working on these types of technologies. There's a lot of other companies that are. In fact, chatbots in general, you're going to start seeing popping up all over the place. I know Salesforce is coming out with theirs. But chatbots, I think, a year or two ago, chatbots was about a $20 million industry. It's projected to be a $22 billion industry by 2022. So the number of chatbots is coming out. And I think it's a reflection of the types of users that are coming in and starting to want to answer questions quickly. And I think even like the millennial workforce, they're used to interacting this way. It's a good example, my nephew, I was interacting with him the other day and we were talking about Rob Gronkowski retiring from the Patriots, and we were talking about for his size, what a freak athlete he was, just phenomenal athlete. And my nephew said, yeah, I think he had like a 39-inch vertical. And I was like, no way did he have a 39-inch vertical. He's like, yeah, no, I'm telling you, a 39-inch vertical. And I go, no way, let's look it up. And so he pulls out his phone and he talks to Siri, he goes, Rob Gronkowski vertical. And Siri doesn't quite understand him. So he does it again, Rob Gronkowski vertical. Siri still doesn't understand him. And what's the guy do? He shoves his phone in his pocket. And I go, dude, you could just type it in real quick and get the answer. Right? And he's like, no, that's too much work. I'm not going to do that. So, I think this is a reflection of the types of people that are going to be interacting within the finance function, and these types of tools are going to be needed. And again, the future is now. I mean, these things are coming out now. Automation tools on the horizon, AP automation. So AP automation used to just really be for the Fortune 1000, OCR technology, optical character recognition that could really take in a paper invoice, read it, basically code it, so you didn't have to have somebody manually coding it in. Now a lot of this technology is actually coming down to the mid and lower market. Bill.com is beta testing its OCR technology. GL automation is also coming. Account rec automation is coming. Blackline has a great solution there. Again, typically used at bigger companies, but now through channel practices is starting to come out to the mid-market and lower market. So a lot of these automation tools are here now and it's starting to be available now for companies to use them. Here's an example of just how the change in technology is affecting a typical financial analyst role. So, and most of you are probably familiar with this process. Almost every company that I know of in the world today, their reporting process looks like this. They've got a general ledger. Their reports are never perfect in there, never look exactly right, and their executives don't want to interact with that, so they export it out of the general ledger. Then they got to format it. They got to shade it right, get the rows set up the right way. Then they got to validate that, hey, revenue on this tab ties out to the revenue on the 10th tab. They got to make sure that there's no debit balance in where there should be a credit balance, and they got to hope that their analyst goes down to the 300th row to actually see that that's a problem. And then after they do all of that, they start to perform analysis. Now they might find that, hey, we forgot to accrue for this big $100,000 legal expense. What should happen is you should go back to the very beginning of the process and start all over again. What happens a lot of times is they go, well, we got to get this report out to the investors. We'll just plug in this $100,000, into Excel, and then we'll go make sure it ties out with the general ledger later. Which I always wonder why investors don't ever question Excel reports coming to them more than they do. But that's what it looks like today. Tomorrow, in the world with a lot of these AI tools coming out, the system can literally format it. There's tools the GLs aren't always great at, but there's tools that allow this to happen. It can actually validate the data and that all the data ties out. It can even go and do some of the analysis, like we paid $20,000 of rent every month for the last 9 months. This month there's $0 sitting in rent. Somebody should probably go figure out if that's true or not. They can literally start to just produce a log, right? And so now all of a sudden your analyst's job, instead of becoming a data cruncher, data manipulator, it goes from what we say goes from bean counter to business advisor. Now they're just simply answering the whys and talking about the whys, right? So it changes the way we work within the function. The impacts are eliminates and automates a lot of work. You get to a single source of truth, which we talked about as a problem earlier. The speed and access and transparency of data becomes a lot quicker. And it eliminates this finance middleman when you're just kind of the go-between between the business and the finance function. I think a great example of utilizing this, and I think this was actually brought up at last year's conference here, Microsoft has taken their forecasting process and used AI with it. And it's gone from, it literally used to take them hundreds of people, 30 days, and they would get within 3.5 points of accuracy for their quarterly forecasting process. That, once they applied AI to it, is down to it takes 2 people, 2 days, and they get within 1.5 points of accuracy. And so there's massive change that's coming with some of these technologies. So a couple more questions for the audience. We'll do a quick breakout here again. I'm going to come over here. Does the size of your company matter when it comes to embracing and investing in technologies for finance and accounting? So does it matter if you're Microsoft, or does it matter if you're, a 40-person company? And then let's do that for this side of the audience. And then on this side of the audience, how do you know if your company needs to evolve its finance and accounting function? Maybe it's fine the way it is. Maybe you don't need a lot of these technology tools. How would you know that? Let's take a few minutes again, dive into your tables and talk through it. We'll give about 7 or 8 minutes to talk through it, and then we'll kind of come back with some of the results. If we got the microphones, why don't we start on this side? Again, the question was, does the size of your company matter when it comes to embracing and investing in technology for the finance and accounting function? Anybody want to share what they talked about?
Thank you. Bart van Rijn, Surveyor Pharmaceuticals. At our table, we had a good discussion on this topic, but I think in the end we concluded that the size really doesn't matter when it comes to embracing or investing. You should always do that, right? There shouldn't be a difference just purely driven by size. However, the impacts of making a decision will be very different, right? It will be depending on the situation where you're in, from a maturity perspective, getting stakeholder buy-in, how does it, run through your IT portfolio board, etc. But, as a starting point, we wouldn't want to make a distinction. And I think increasingly we see technologies that cater to multiple size organizations.
Yep.
Again, the impact will be different, but
Great.
we want to
Yeah,
embrace.
so takeaway there that it's just as important for every company. How you apply it might be different from big companies to small companies, but that every company needs to be thinking about it. Good. Any other thoughts from this side of the room? I know I was at one table, I can't remember which one, but I think some of the discussion there was around, when you have a small finance and accounting function, one or two resources, and you've got a resource that's doing, half their time on AP and half their time on AR, going and introducing a technology that cuts the accounts payable work in half really doesn't do that much for that particular situation, because you're only saving a quarter or 20% of a person. So I do think there are some differences there, and good points by that table on how you can actually reap the benefits of it, because you got the cost of it, and are you really taking out that much work? Any other thoughts on this side of the room? Okay, cool. So we'll move over to this side. The question on here was, how do you know if your company needs to evolve its finance and accounting function? Maybe it's just fine the way it is. Is there any thoughts from over here on?
Hello, Maritza Aguilar from the LA chapter. A couple of things that came up is if you walk around your team's area and you see too many stacks of paper, is one that it tells you, okay, you need to automate.
That's a great one.
The other one is if you can't answer the business unit's questions easily and quickly, if you don't have the information, it probably tells you you don't have enough data easily available to address business questions in a timely manner. I think that was it.
So if you can't provide transparency to your internal and external stakeholders, that's a good sign you need some help on the technology side. Good.
Varvara, I'm with the Chicago CFO group. So just echoing the comments from this other table, I think we discussed that similarly what we've seen is, for the most part, is as you look at the overall sort of a finance function and where do you spend the time, you're sort of applying kind of a very simple 80-20 rule. If most of the time people spend 80% in the past and 20% in the future, you sort of kind of really need to think about evolving your processes and systems to enable your people, and really spending more 80% of the time partnering with the business versus closing the books and doing reconciliations. And the other thing we noted here is it's a continuous improvement process, right? So it's not kind of a one-time you're done. It's a journey. As business needs change, finance team as our role to sort of empower making the strategic decisions also evolves. And we need to constantly think about automating and reducing the time spent on things that could be automated.
Yep, great. Constantly staying in tune with the new things that are coming out. Awesome. Any other thoughts from this side? I think there's one more back here.
Yeah, I'd just add, your customers may drive you there. And if they're, you're going to lose customers if you're not able to interact with them in a digital and a fast way. So, yeah, and I echo everything that everybody else said. That's pretty much all the topics we talked about on our table.
Yeah, that's a great point on, thinking externally outside of the company, your customers, your investors, the way you present the financials and the way the financials and financial information comes back out is a reflection of the company itself. And so if it starts to feel really old school to new clients and new customers and to your investors, that may not be the place you want to be. Great. All right, well, let's move on into the deck a little more. So how do we ride this wave of evolution? If all these things are coming, right? If AI is coming out and new technologies, automation technologies are coming out, how does your company take advantage of these things. I heard a lot of the discussions around that, like how do I even know what to access? I've implemented this new system, but I don't get what I want out of it. So how do you make sure that, one, you're staying in tune with the new technologies, and how do you know how to take advantage of them, and how can your company take advantage of them? And so I think the big thing here is the companies that are going to be the best at building these types of solutions, so building the AI tools, building the automation tools, and even implementing them, are the ones that can centralize a lot of work, centralize a huge volume of work, to the point that was made over there earlier. If you've only got 10 hours a month of accounts payable work, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go build an AP automation tool, or to even potentially buy an AP automation tool. You're just not getting that much value out of it. So the organizations that have a lot of volume, or can access a lot of volume and centralize that volume, are in a good place to start taking advantage of this. Because you can't, if you centralize things, then you can start to standardize them. It's really hard to standardize when you've got a bunch of different silos and a bunch of different organizations and people doing things a different way. And even if you try really hard, as soon as something comes up and some decision needs to be made, this person may decide one thing, this person may decide something else, and all of a sudden your standardization is out the window. So centralizing is key to then be able to standardize. And I think how hard you focus on standardization is really important. I think everybody will talk about it's important. We got the standard process for this, the standard answer for that. But I find that in our experience, we see a huge difference in the maniacalness that people go with about that. Some people have the good lip service, but as soon as a trade-off comes up, and as soon as the salesperson comes in and says, well, we could do that, but we might potentially lose this particular client, then all of a sudden the standardization goes out the window, and there's always giving in. And so that creates a situation where you don't have the standardization. And if you don't have standardization, you can't automate. So if there's a bunch of different decision trees around things, it's really hard to automate those things. And so the huge foundation here to get to automation and great transparency is centralization, standardization, then you can automate it. And so what are your options if you're a company out there and you want, hey, all this talk about having transparent solutions are great and automated solutions are great. So what are your options? You can either say, we don't really need that. We can live with what we got. You can either build it in-house or shared service it. Maybe your organization's big enough to create a shared service team that multiple business units can use the shared service off of that. Or you can potentially use an outsourced provider or FAS provider, finance as a service provider, to access those technologies. Those are really the three options. Live with it. We don't really have to have it. It's not going to impact us that much. In fact, I was on the way out here a couple of days ago and called my 91-year-old grandmother, and I forgot that she runs a ranch, and she keeps the books for her little ranch, and it's only got about 20 head of cow on it, so it's pretty small. But I told her I was coming out here to the conference, and she's like, well, what are you going out there to talk about? And I was like, oh, the future of finance and software and AI and how much disruption it's going to be to the finance function. And she's like, I don't need any of that fancy software and AI to do my books for my ranch. And I was like, you're probably right. She doesn't have a lot of transactions, and she can close the books on her own. It all works great. So that is an option. All right, so what path does your company take? I think the path you take depends on the size you're on. Again, I think it's a great point that technology and staying up with technology is important for all companies. How you do it may be different based on the size of your company. All companies, whether large here is $1 billion or above, medium, 250 million to 1 billion, and small, kind of under 250 million. All of them can kind of live with what they have, maybe make some incremental changes when they become available. Or if you really want to transform and you really want to get complete transparency, a lot of automation throughout the entire organization, you kind of have two choices. Either build it or access it through an outsource or FAS provider. And the reason that is because of the volumes. The large companies are going to have the volumes of transactions, the volumes of things that will make sense for them to go make those investments themselves and to create those automated tools and the transparency tools. The medium-sized companies, it's a question mark, truthfully, in that range. If you're big enough and you have enough volume to go warrant building it yourself, you may need to access an outsourced provider. If you're small, you really have a choice of keeping it the way it is, maybe making some incremental changes, but to get the full transparency, the tools that we're kind of talking about, the Simon type technology, the automation of your AP function, automation of your GL, you're really gonna have to leverage partners to do that. It's even hard at that stage to even go buy the point solutions, to go buy a point solution of Bill.com or a T&E solution, because the challenge that they have is the point solutions, when they go buy them, they need an expert in their company that knows how to use that point solution and get the most out of that point solution. So you hear it all the time where people implement a NetSuite or an Intact or some of these cloud-based GLs. They kind of need somebody in-house that really can be the super user, and that person's expensive, to be the super user and understand how to run and get the most out of that system and tool, and how to connect it potentially to other tools. So it's hard because you need the super user. You don't probably have the experience of implementing it 10, 20, 30, 40 times. You don't get the channel pricing or the volume pricing because you're smaller. And so it just makes it more challenging on that side. So live with it. How do you know if you're okay living with it? I always ask, is it working? I mean, is it working okay? Does everybody get what they need? I kind of define that by, is your transaction processing smooth, and does it have controls? There's no fraudulent events happening. Things are getting coded to the correct places. Your books can get closed in 3 to 10 days. Your reporting needs are met for all internal and external stakeholders. The cost of your finance and accounting function is world-class. Back to one of the charts that we had earlier here. You know, if you're larger in size, around 1% of revenue is a good rule of thumb there. This one's important. Your CFO is not involved with the accounting process and report generation. Again, they're staying strategic. That's just happening. They get them and they consume them. And if you think about a year or two out, where is my company going to be in a year or two? Can the technology solution that I have in place today work with where we're going in a year or two? Those are the kind of questions to kind of ask yourself if you're thinking about, hey, should we just live with what we have? Maybe we don't need all this disruptive things that are out there, right? If you're going to build in-house, I think the big things to think about there are, do you have enough volume? And I think, you know, this is thousands of transactions. It's not a couple of hundred typically. What market advantage is it going to create for you? Is it really that you're going to, because you process your transactions so much better, you're now going to beat your competitor? Highly, highly unlikely. Most likely, the only competitive advantage you're going to get here is that you have a lower cost structure. And so can you really beat the cost structure by building an in-house than going different paths? Will this be out of date in the near future, whatever solution that you may be bringing in? How do you avoid the same problems in the new system? And this is one we hear all the time where companies get excited, they've got all these problems, they think, okay, let's go get a new GL or ERP, or let's go get a new technology solution. Once we get this technology solution in place, it's going to solve all of our problems, things are going to be great. And then you talk to them, it takes a long time for them to get it implemented. You talk to them afterwards and you go, hey, did that solve all your problems? And a lot of times the answer is, most of the times the answer is, no, not really. We still got this problem and that problem. And most of it's because they didn't rethink the process and the people around the technology. They just put a technology in place. They kept the same people, largely the same processes, swapped out one technology for the new technology, and it's no wonder why things aren't really changed. You got the same people, largely the same processes, just with the different technology in the middle of it. So you really need to rethink your entire people, process, and technology stack when you want to go to make these changes. How do you measure and monitor the quality of it? Do you have metrics to kind of measure the error rates and the turnaround times that you're getting? And if you are going to build it in-house, I think it's super, super important that you find an expert builder to help you through that. And to define that a little bit more, the expert builder is somebody it's not a generalist. It's not somebody that's done this once. We hear this kind of fool's gold a lot. Well, John's implemented, or he worked in NetSuite before at his previous company. He can go help us here. That's kind of the fool's gold. I think typically when you're looking for an expert builder, you're looking for somebody that's done it 10, 20, 30, hopefully even 50 times, that knows all the different corner cases and can help you around those corner cases. And if you do it, how do you make sure that that builder has enough time? It was actually interesting, this came up at one of the tables we were at where the young lady that we were talking to said, I got hired in, they asked me to do the controller role, they wanted me to do all the monthly close, get everything done. In the meantime, they also wanted me to go fix the Great Plains implementation that they did that was completely wrong and needed to be redone. And so here you've got a situation where you've got somebody that's got a day job and you're asking them to go do a builder project, and it's a really hard recipe for disaster. I don't think that investors and even CEOs realize how many times they set up their finance professionals to fail with giving them a task that's completely impossible. You're going to do all this maintaining work, and on your part-time job, you're going to go do this huge builder project where you don't even really have an expertise in terms of you've done it 10 or 15 times. There's a lot of situations we see like that where it's just you're set up for failure from the beginning. If you do decide to outsource it or look at a finance as a service provider, there's definitely things that you should think about on that front as well. One, is it a managed service provider or is it really just staff augmentation? So are you buying staff where you're just renting staff and they're putting in a CFO or a controller or accounting manager or a project person? In that situation, you're not really buying an output, you're just buying something else that you have to manage. If you really want to outsource it or use a FAS solution, you should really be thinking about, I want to switch my mindset to, I want to buy the outputs. I don't want to manage the people, I don't want to manage the software, I don't want to manage the people and the software together to get the results I want. I just want to buy the outputs. And in that world, you should be thinking about the billing actually gives you a little bit of an indication of that. If it's T&M billing, that's usually on the lower end of expertise. Up to solution-based pricing is usually an indicator of much more expertise within the product or service that they're delivering. The other thing is you should be asking what's on the roadmap of their solution, right? A FAS solution should be just like a SaaS solution. In SaaS, you buy the software and you pay a subscription fee, and that software is going to have new functionality that comes out next month, next year, and you just get access to that functionality through the subscription fees that you're paying. The FAS model works the exact same way. There's new functionality coming out, there's a roadmap of things that are coming, and you should just get access to that roadmap as part of your subscription fee. So if they don't have that, it's an indicator that you're probably more buying staff augmentation. How is the solution monitored and controlled? Do they have task management solutions? How do you know that inbound requests aren't slipping through the cracks? Are there things out there that they can monitor, make sure it's assigned to somebody, make sure it's in a different stage and then closed out? Do they have quality metrics? Can they measure error rates per 1,000 invoices, for example? Do they have turnaround times that they're measuring for you? These are good questions that you can ask yourself to vet through, again, if you're getting a managed service provider or just staff augmentation. Talk to their customers and be thinking about how easy or hard is it to get out of the relationship, and make sure you're asking them that. Great. And that's the conclusion of the presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions if we have time. Questions? Let's see how we're doing on time. Any questions on this one back here?
Hi, Ron Good from Spokane, Washington. I just had a question in an age of big data and data analysis. To what extent have you seen finance departments expanding to encompass that function under their department, and to what extent have you seen data become its own department with its own C-level executive?
Sorry, say that one more time.
In a world of big data, where
Big
so
data.
much data is available now and so much data analysis is being done, how much do you see that being done under the finance department, and how much do you see it becoming its own department with its own C-level executive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably don't have a good experience level on that. I mean, most of the time we see a lot of the data analytics under the finance department, but I know there's definitely situations where they do create data scientists and bring in data scientists to do a lot more there, and I'm not too sure on where you're seeing that fall. Good question, though. Any other questions on us? I think we're right at the end of our time here. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate your time today. Appreciate it.